External fire calls for an outward focus on serving your community at any scale. Notice that the entire FIRES process involves a seemingly backwards approach to personal fulfillment and self-improvement. If you remain dedicated to this program, it'll work like this. 1. Focus on your big picture purposes. 2. Express that purpose outwardly in terms of how you care for others. 3. Express that purpose inwardly in terms of how you care for yourself. Now, it's not lost on me that this progression flies in the face of current thinking, which tends to recommend self-care first and social contribution second. We've all heard the metaphor of the oxygen mask on the flight, right? When the flight attendants give you the safety rundown, they tell you to use your oxygen mask before helping anybody else to put theirs on. The idea is that if you can't breathe properly yourself, you won't have the wherewithal to save anybody else. That seems to make a lot of sense. So why don't we move from defining our core values and deepest beliefs right into determining how to best care for ourselves and reach personal goals like the internal fire? Well, once we are aligned with our purpose, shouldn't we be focusing on making ourselves as holistically healthy as possible? Don't we want to be in good shape before taking on the world's problems? Why exactly does external fire follow spiritual fire? Well, before I explain, let me offer up one caveat. There may be some of you watching this video series who have, in fact, neglected their own self-care to a point where this issue deserves your immediate attention. If you know that your mental or physical health is truly suffering, do not launch ambitious social contribution strategies before addressing it. And in particular, if you are someone who uses social involvement, charity, or community work to avoid taking care of yourself, please proceed cautiously. You really might need to put your own oxygen mask on before fussing with anybody else's. However, others that are watching this or reading this chapter, this will have no pressing health or self-care problems on you, but you'll suffer from a case of chronic blahness. For you, life just doesn't have any electricity, punch, or sizzle. It doesn't have any of the right down to your bones emotional resonance that you imagine truly happy people experience. For you folks, the answer may not be in focusing on yourself and your myriad of dissatisfactions. The answer may be outward. It may be time to test your long-range vision. Now, in our metaphor of the lighters and the two styles of fire, remember out-of-control infernos and well-managed blazes? We pictured the external fire occupying a large brick oven in the courtyard. You use this fire to cook a large meal that can sustain your community as you define it, at whichever scale you like. It could be your neighborhood, it could be your city, or it could be your nation, or it could be humanity itself. Think big. I would argue that for the vast majority of us, when we prepare a meal for community, we find that we ourselves become nourished. That's why external fire, above all the other fires, is about abundance. It's about the miraculous way that sharing seems to multiply rather than diminish our resources. Think back to the time of Jesus feeding the multitudes with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. In that story, because the bread is blessed and broken up into pieces and shared, it miraculously stretches far enough to feed thousands of people. When we give abundantly, when we commit to sharing the resources we have, it has the effect of bringing greater abundance into our own lives. That's why external fire comes before the other fires. When you have cultivated true abundance in your life by serving community, you find your self-focused, short-range, and immediate needs are easier to define and fulfill. If you do the work of lighting and tending your external fire, by the time you get to your financial fire, you might find your needs and wants in that arena just simply aren't as consuming. They will have greater focus and will seem more reasonable and attainable. You'll feel good about the reasons why you want or need certain financial outcomes. The fact is that we deeply need to contribute meaningfully to communities. As humans, we need to be part of something bigger than ourselves to truly thrive as individuals. And there are certain spiritual, psychological, and philosophical itches many of us never scratch because we don't pursue opportunities to give freely. In the words of Jean Vanier, the Catholic philosopher and founder of L'Arche Group of Communities for Individuals with Developmental Disabilities, individualistic material progress and the desire to gain prestige by coming out on top have taken over from the sense of fellowship, compassion, and community. Now, people live more or less on their own in a small house, jealously guarding their goods and planning to acquire more, with a notice on the gate that says, "Beware of the dog." Being entombed in our own homes, jealously guarding the little money, talent, time, or resources we have, is corrosive to our souls because it encourages isolation. Not being part of anything bigger than your own survival is a lonely way to live. And it turns out that this type of loneliness creates its own vicious cycle. John Cacchione, director of the University of Chicago's Center for Cognitive and Social Neuroscience, has studied loneliness for decades. He knows that as human beings, we've become social animals, or beings that can't survive or thrive except in the context of our highly interconnected tribe. Throughout history, a feeling of being bonded to people correlated with good survival outcomes. It meant you were making a valuable contribution to others and could enjoy access to their support when you needed it. However, when a person was evicted from their tribe for one misdeed or another, that person suffered from loneliness, a feeling of social isolation. That's why, to this day, when someone experiences loneliness long enough, their brain goes into what John calls self-preservation mode. Their visual cortex is enhanced, and the part of their brain that is responsible for empathy is weakened. Furthermore, the person whose brain has gone into self-preservation mode has a reduced inclination to seek out the support of a community. That's because, in the past, people who were ostracized from their communities and attempted to force their way back into the group tended to face even more hostility, sometimes even injury or death. It was wiser to just avoid those groups. So, sadly, loneliness tends to create even more loneliness because in chronic doses, it weakens a person's instinct to seek out community. So are you someone who feels blah, out of sorts, or vaguely dissatisfied, stuck, worried, or fearfully hell-bent on protecting the little you feel you have? I wonder, could your problem be the terrible loneliness that comes with living in some degree of self-preservation mode? And is that loneliness creating its own vicious cycle of making you even less likely to look beyond yourself for solutions? On the other hand, do you feel connected, alive, secure, and as though you have access to all the abundance you'd ever need? I wonder, could this baseline of satisfaction you experience be in any way related to your secure place within a community or even multiple communities? Do you meaningfully contribute to society and feel as though you can, in turn, draw from communal resources, everything from finances to emotional support when you need them? Do your feelings of abundance and connection create their own virtuous cycles of investing into and drawing from community? Loneliness is inspired by scarcity and produces more scarcity. Connectedness is inspired by abundance and produces more abundance. That's why external fire, and not the fires that focus more narrowly on you or your immediate nearest and dearest, follows the spiritual fire. It is truly the next logical step. Whether you realize or not, your very brain is designed to be part of something bigger than you. When you have this connection to community, once again at any scale, you have access to a natural feeling of abundance. When abundance, a force diametrically opposed to loneliness, is fully operational in your life, you'll find your concerns around self-care and finances and relationships become a little less intense. It's not just that your community or your society needs your contribution. It's that you profoundly need to give it. Otherwise, you'll continue to feel as though you're living in the cold with only yourself to turn to. You'll feel as though you're always struggling to get your own oxygen mask on, perpetually out of breath, stuck in a lonely moment that always feels like an impending disaster.